When the latest blast of heated U.S. inflation data rolled across the Atlantic last Wednesday, you could sense the European Central Bank policymakers stiffening their negotiators' poker faces over their post-meeting banquet in Frankfurt. The 3.5% year-over-year surge in American consumer prices was an unexpected gust, prompting traders to push back bets on when the Federal Reserve might finally start relieving the monetary pressure. After months of signaling that it was poised to cut interest rates as soon as June, the ECB now had to brace for some awkward questions. Would the European rate setters be cowed into following any delay by their stateside counterparts? Or would they forge their own path, even if it meant an unpopular divergence from the transatlantic partner who traditionally set the tempo for global monetary policy? For an institution that has struggled to escape the Fed's shadow, the latest inflation jolt amounted to a significant leadership test. But as this unscripted economic drama played out over brandy and cigars in the ECB sook-paneled halls, the newly self-assured Europeans seemed to relish the chance to demonstrate their bona fide independence. "We are not Switzerland, we are the euro area and can operate independently without worrying about the exchange rate," one governing council member brusquely informed me. Another huffed that for the ECB to mimic the Fed's moves would actually be illegal. The disdain for any hint of deferential policy following represented a cultural shift for the historically conservative ECB, which has always moved deliberately in the Fed's wake. But with Eurozone inflation decelerating toward the 2% target and economic growth expected to be merely tepid this year, ECB President Christine Lagarde and most of her council mates conveyed that now was their chance to take the reins as the vanguard of post-pandemic normalization. "We are data-dependent, not Fed-dependent," Lagarde retorted dismissively when pressed on whether the ECB's looming rate cut might fluctuate with the whims of the Fed's policy maneuverings. Most of her colleagues readily concurred, with one telling me we've got to focus on our mandate and not get distracted by what the Fed might do. There was no question that the ECB had clearly telegraphed its intent to finally start lowering rates from their current 4% peak at the next policy conclave on June 6. While a handful of hawkish voices advocated holding firm immediately after Wednesday's U.S. shocker, as many as 6 council members were said to have pressed for an earlier easing at this week's meeting, apparently falling just short of the 9 votes required for any accelerated action. But beneath their unified smokescreen of nonchalance about American monetary crosswinds, it was evident that at least some of the ECB's rate setters were nervous about straying too far from their familiar Fed anchor. The mere possibility of the ECB initiating its easing cycle a month or two before the Fed prompted a few raised eyebrows over the long-term risks of a sharply stronger euro undermining the ECB's inflation capping efforts. While playing down such fears in public, one concerned policymaker confided that the ECB would be wise to avoid cutting rates much more aggressively than the Fed, partly out of fear of weakening the euro and so further stoking inflation. Indeed, despite the central bank's newly touted self-reliance, external rate handicappers like ING's Karsten Brzezinski disputed Lagarde's assertion that U.S. inflation trends were irrelevant to Europe's price outlook. "We disagree with what Christine Lagarde said regarding U.S. inflation and the full decoupling of Eurozone inflation developments from those in the U.S., Brzezinski said, noting how American price growth had historically nicely led Eurozone developments, with a lag of around half a year. J.P. Morgan's Greg Fusisi similarly argued that U.S. inflation developments also have some relevance for the ECB, pointing to the recent stickiness of Eurozone service prices as a ripple effect from the supply chain pressures choking the American economy. For all of the ECB's rhetorical resolve, it seems the central bank's new maverick monetary trail may not veer too far from the more established path blazed by the Fed, at least not yet. While the Europeans are plainly eager to project a bolder self-charted course, the post-meeting huddle in Frankfurt showed that severing ingrained policy links is easier decreed than implemented. The ECB's runway for an assertive independent streak could be distinctly compressed if the inflation gusts whipping America's economic sails soon regain their fury across the Atlantic. But for now, the central bank's controllers seem to relish their long-awaited chance to seize the controls themselves and navigate the latest turbulence as they see fit. Whether their freshly proclaimed air of monetary self-determination can be maintained in the months ahead could well be determined by the strength and trajectory of those squalls still building over the American horizon.